So, welcome everyone to part 3 of the Starforts and Citadels, ancient waterways. And we're looking at, just picking up from this morning's videos, we're looking at the northeast of Scotland. We're looking at the ancient waterways that fed down into the central belt, basically, central Scotland, into an area known as the Central Belt, but it sits under Orion's Belt, and hence the name Central Belt of Scotland. So we're looking at these waterways, and these waterways of the UK all fed into, or sorry, I should say, these waterways of Scotland all fed into the Firth of Forth and what we call today the Clyde River, which runs through Glasgow. So we're not going to look at central Scotland at the moment. What we're going to look at is Aberdeen, and we're going to look at the waterways here in Aberdeen and how the waterways themselves worked. So in earlier recordings today, I do apologise for the sound quality. My laptop's a way to give up, and it's quite an old laptop, but I've got a new laptop coming soon, so I'll be able to do live and even more videos, hopefully. But the graphic cards in this video and the audio quality isn't great, so I do apologise. It will be remedied in a few weeks' time. So in the early recording, yeah, we were looking at Balnagas, Torry in Aberdeen, and we can quite clearly see here, this is a Starfort sitting here. This is a mound of a Starfort, and there's another corner here, and when we're seen on the topographic map, you can actually see that, excuse me, you can see here that all of Torry sits raised up, and it is a Starfort sitting in an ancient canal waterway. All this blue area here is below sea level, so you've got -4, -2, -1, 4 metres above sea level, 7 metres above sea level, 10 metres and 13 metres above sea level. So what I've discovered on my journey so far, discovering Starforts now for, I don't know, since 2015, I've walked in all these places, I've visited all the places that I was interested in, and for those who know me, I've spent the good part of nearly 5 years travelling throughout the UK, primarily up and down the ley line known as the Spine of Albion, but I've been travelling throughout different parts of the country, looking to find these ancient waterways, and I've been asking the question, like, where did all the water go? How did they drain it? And it's quite simple, really. They drained a lot of the water through mining and quarrying. They built dams, water hydrolysis systems, hydro dams, sorry, not hydrolysis, hydro dams, and blocked a lot of the water. And a lot of the waterways that we have inland, which we call lakes or lochs, they're actually the ancient salt waterways which fed into the valleys, which are all below sea level, and I'm going to show you that now with Aberdeen. So yeah, we began this part 1 looking at Torry and the Starfort of Torry. I had a quick look at Ferry Hill and showed you the Starfort of Ferry Hill, which is quite easy to see here. And what I'm going to do now is take you further on a journey through the waterways. I mentioned before that this ancient waterway here, which what were the waterways? The waterways fed when the high tide came in. The waterways fed salt water in, and what we understand today is graveyards and walled gardens and such. These were not places for burial, nor were they places to grow lovely vegetables and plants, although it did become that once the waters had been receded. But these places, these walled gardens, usually the walls were made of specific types of granite, or quite often all the wall gardens are made of red brick, and they have a rendering over them nowadays, but originally they were red brick, and red brick is iron oxide, and iron oxide is a battery, really. It conducts, it holds and stores electricity, and this is what red brick manufacturing was all about. And we read about that in the book of Exodus, chapter 1 and 2 I think it is, where it says that the Hebridean people, not the Hebrews, but the Hebridean people were taken into slavery by the Egyptians, and the Egyptians are the Egyptos, which is a Greek word meaning the fallen ones, the dark lords. So the Egyptos enslaved people and drained the waters, and it's the same families that we're dealing with today. So this waterway feeds down into Deeside, and it did eventually feed into the River Dee. But I don't want to look at that today on this particular video. What I want to do is just give you a quick glimpse here of some of the waterways. Where you see the blue areas here, you can see that this waterway went all the way down to Bankery and Deeside, and there was a waterway going around Aberdeen, Contour, Aberdeen Airport, Dice, and the waterway continued up through what we have today as the A96, which is a road that's raised up, and either side of the A96 you have embankments or dells or valleys. With the River Don today, it's only a small trickle of a waterway now compared to what it was before. In the past, fresh water was held back and found other means to find its way to the sea, because the salt water being of heavier density, as it came in the tide, it filled up all these valleys. And what we understand today is fresh river, anywhere in Britain, fresh river waterways were actually salt waterways. Now you can you can verify this, because wherever you go you'll find the word salt. A prime example of this is Ayrshire, Saltcoats. Saltcoats was a massive bay where the salt tide would come in, they would capture the salt crystals, the tide would go out, and they would split that salt crystals and the water that contained the salt crystals using the electricity from the towers and the steeples, and they would split that water to give them free gas, which is hydrolysis, known as hydrogen gas, and from that they would create electricity using various domes and steeples and such. I'll throw a picture in showing you how the steeple works at this point in the video later on. The very top of the steeple had brass or copper, it had mercury, it had an octagon shape which was a storage device, and then all made of red brick and fabricated, or a fabricated stone put around that red brick. And then the upper domes of our churches, or the steeples of the churches, and the pillars were where they pulled down the piezo electricity. It's called piezo electricity, which is up there in the ether. So you would have the churches with the metal rods going straight up into the air, and the salt waters would pass around the churches. The word church is really just the word charge, a charge house. Through time, language changes and words change, and they've done that deliberately to hide what these buildings and structures, what their original purpose were for. But these were charge houses. They pulled down electricity, and they provided free power to the local areas and to the estates before the royal bloods of Europe, the Dracos, came in and took over all the estates. The estates that we have now were taken over by the Normans and Vikings and all the same people, but they were taken over by, it wasn't barons in Scotland, but they became dukes and lords and earls, and but these families that took over the estates, they didn't take them over for our benefit, they took them over on behalf of the Draco in order to take our power, to take our way of life away, so that they could enslave us. Introduced a financial system, get us in debt and keep us forever in debt, in order to provide food, warmth, power. We need to work, we need to be enslaved to them, and that's how the system works. But what I'm going to look at is this waterway. You can quite clearly see that from Aberdeen all the way around the airport. Aberdeen Airport is a big starport. It's actually 2 starports, and I'll slip up an image of these in here. But the A96 rides quite high on the embankment of the River Don, and you can see here that the waterways came all the way through beyond Inverurie. This was all water, and this is why they say that we're lost at sea under the legal or the unlawful jurisdiction, because much, as I said in one of the first videos, part 1 I think it was, we're lost at sea, and they have built estates. No, sorry, not estate. Council estates. They built their own versions of the estates, the powerhouses, in the waterways, so that they can actually harness our energies from those waterways. Most of the houses that we live in today, if you live in a city or a town or maybe even a village, most of these houses were, as we can see from this image, underwater. So this is where we get the term lost at sea, because the majority of our postcodes are a postcode lottery. We are lost at sea. And you can see here that this waterway goes all the way through Whiteford, up through Old Rain, and up past Kirkton of Rain, and these were all water basins carrying the salt tides. As the tide came in, the salt would come in and fill all these waterways, and on these hills and high places you'll find steeples, churches, all sitting up on the embankments, quite high, usually 300, 400, 500 metres above what we call today sea level. So let's flip back to the map of Aberdeen, and as you can see, this land, there are no waterways here now, but it is all still below sea level, and all these premises here, Northfield, Maastricht, Persley, these are all built, Bucksburn, these are all built high up on the banks. But as you go down into places like the new Persley house in the state, the new houses at this is the areas known as Muggy Moss and Wood End, these were all underwater. This area, this River Don, as I said before, wasn't a fresh river water. It was fed, it was a sea inlet, and all this green area you see and these trees that have been planted, they were planted probably sometime in the 1700s, and to soak up the water basically. And oh, sorry about that. So this was a much wider, much luck here, this was a much wider waterway. In fact, most of these fields here that we see, the Grandholm estate, one of the most powerful families, actually, the Grandholm, they enslaved people for many years, and I think it was the Crombie jackets that they're well known for, that people were taken and put into mills and workhouses which were sitting on these salt waterways. And the reason why they took us, the living being, and enslaved us in these waterways is because when the waterways choked up, when they blocked up, there was a massive meteor shower that happened somewhere in the 1500s, which caused tsunamis and floods and all sorts of stuff, and this is why we see mud floods everywhere. But the waterways choked up, and they needed power, so they began to enslave us, because we are 80% water, and salt was in our body too, so they put us into these places where the waters used to be in order to enslave us. Now here's this, what I was saying, the Starfort of Aberdeen Airport. We're moving along what was this great waterway here, so we're at this area here, Dyson Aberdeen Airport. And you can see here that all this was lost at sea. And this is where the legal trap, the legal jurisdiction comes in. This is a portal. Water is a portal. An airport always sits in an ancient waterway, and these are portals between worlds, between realms. Our ancestors knew this, and our ancestors, the Picts, the Gaels, the Scots. They protected these waterways. We have this idea that we were all at war with each other, which is a total fabrication. That has been brought in by the Draco bloodlines. It is evident by history, just looking at history, that there was a Caledonian Federation. In fact, you can find many maps telling you that the Caledonian, or the Pictish and the Gaels, which is not just the Scottish people, the Gaels themselves are the Welsh, the Irish, Brittonic people. They were known as the Brits, and this is where we get the word Brit from. The word Brit is also a Hebraic word, a Hebrew word, which is used in the Bible, which means covenant. The word Berit is a covenant. So, you know, Jewish people today believe that they are the covenant people. Some of them are descended from Gaels who were exiled from these lands and taken away after this great disaster that came in 1500s. They have been plundering our lands, and stealing our children, stealing our lives, stealing everything from us from the 1600s. But it really wasn't until the 1700s and then the 1800s and the time of Victoria, when the Hanoverian Draco bloodlines took over the crowns, and that happened with the Union of the Crowns in the 1709, I think it was. Really, England had no crown because England was all under sea. We'll look at that later on. So the Union of the Crowns was a falsification in itself. They were actually stealing the crowns of all the Caledonian, all the Gallic people, and we all had kings and high kings who ruled these different places. Now, and you can see that these places in the past were huge waterways. There were huge waterways just separating certain pieces of land. So when we are called the British Isles, the word Brit means covenant, a Hebraic word for covenant, and Ish means man. So these isles were all islands, not one separate land mass as we see Britain and the United Kingdom as today, but they were separate isles, separate people, and you had different clans and tribes who united under the Caledonian Federation and to fight the Anglo-Saxons who came along. The Anglo-Saxons, the Normans and Vikings, who are all the same people who came and stole our lands and rewrote history. So yeah, we were looking at Aberdeen Airport there. Aberdeen Airport's a huge starport, so we'll jump back to that, and you can see the starport here. It sits right there, clear as day, at Starfort, and it's the same over here. There's another Starfort sitting over here. I do have other images showing that exactly, but the majority of this, as we can see, was, as we can see, underwater or below sea level. And what would happen is the salt water would come in with the tide, and they would fill all these valleys all the way through inland, as far, you know, the whole land was filled with these waterways, all the way through Rhynie, Huntly, and so on. Now, it wasn't just fed from the Aberdeen coast, it was fed from multiple coasts. So if we look here, you can see we go around by Keith, and then up by, where is this place called? Up by I'm trying to see the map. I ain't got my glasses on. Well, we can see here, Fochabers, that's the place I'm looking for. All this was all waterways. They were all under waterways, and yeah, and this was fed from multiple sources. So the waters came in, the salt waters came in and fed all over the place, and yeah, filled these waterways where the castles and towers sat. A castle is a device that casts electricity, casts L. It's all in the spelling.